In the news this week, NVIDIA is told, deal with it by the US government. Additionally, the Steam Deck OLED has some audio jack issues. And NVIDIA has an RTX 5880 GPU that we'll be talking about. And we're on location in a super secret place after our crazy Intel San Francisco video. And in that video, I did some hard-hitting journalism. I interviewed this guy. Sir, what did you think of the presentation? What did you... Okay. All right. I have to find another one. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake swappable blade fans, available in 120 and 140 millimeter sizes. The new Thermaltake fans include 3 sets of swappable blades, so that even as you change builds or cases, you can ensure the LEDs are always presented on their best side. The swappable blades allow builders to get the fan frame out of the way of the lights by reversing the blade direction to reconfigure the fan as push or pull, while keeping the struts relatively hidden, and keeping the fan frame oriented one way. Swapping blades is done by applying pressure evenly to opposite sides, then pressing until the click. Each fan also has pin-to-pad connections for cableless daisy chaining, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. Up first, U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo issued a sternly worded warning to Jensen Huang, who was in the audience at the recent Reagan National Defense Forum, and this warning was about the already imposed sanctions for GPUs and AI processing performance. Quote, I know there are CEOs of chip companies in this audience who were a little cranky with me when I did that because you're losing revenue. That, by the way, is what you would call shots fired. It's a technical term. Quote continues, such is life. Protecting our national security matters more than short-term revenue, end quote. The Commerce Secretary then doubled down, referring to NVIDIA's China-specific processors like the H800 that were designed in the wake of previous sanctions. Quote, if you redesign a chip around a particular cut line that enables them to do AI, I'm going to control it the very next day. These are very clear and direct statements that threaten to further limit the amount that NVIDIA can tap into the vast demand for its processors in the China-based market. As such, NVIDIA hasn't taken it lightly. After all, Jensen Huang recently sent out an email to his own leadership team making the huge statement that NVIDIA is, quote, no longer a graphics company and that everything is going to deep learning. These quotes were published in a fascinating article on the New Yorker's website that's too large to cover here, so we genuinely encourage you to read it for yourself if you're interested in the industry at all, or its leadership, or AI. It's got another quote, and good gems in there too, such as this one from NVIDIA's Brian Catanzaro, who said, quote, I've been afraid of Jensen sometimes. And the quote from Catanzaro continues and says, but I also know he loves me. Yes, fear and love, often a great combination. Anyway, this change of focus is on the back of NVIDIA's belief that generative AI in particular is a way for the future, and the company wants as big a piece of that AI pie as it can get. So, as such, NVIDIA, being an American company, is now, quote, working very closely with the US government and the Commerce Department to create processors for export that'll comply with those restrictions. We covered this in the last episode, but the restrictions have a certain total processing power ranking that they have to fall under in order to not require special licensing. This is according to a Reuters article following a media roundtable meeting in Singapore where Huang spoke on the topic. Quote, our plan now is to continue to work with the government to come up with a new set of products that comply with the new regulations that have certain limits. Huang also stated that the China market right now makes up about 20% of NVIDIA's revenue, and NVIDIA noted that that could change depending on how far these restrictions go. NVIDIA, in a way, is doing what it's always done, which is chase emerging markets. So this isn't a new approach for them. They're profit first, of course. It's just that this time, they also have to navigate governmental restrictions, and that is kind of a different animal because there aren't many things more powerful than a company like NVIDIA in terms of at least its financial power. But the US government, generally speaking, is one of them, so they will have to contend with that. Up next, the Steam Deck OLED and noisy headphone jack issues. So this is something we've been able to replicate. A couple of you emailed us about it, so thank you for alerting us. But it's been a popular topic on Reddit for the last week or so. So to catch everyone up, some Steam Deck OLED handhelds are exhibiting an issue of onboard audio for the 3.5 millimeter jack, wherein under certain conditions, the noise floor of that is high and it's producing a particularly annoying buzzing type of noise. So for this, the analog audio circuit noise floor is high, and that results in a low but ever-present buzzing sound. Some owners of the Deck OLED have been talking about this in multiple Reddit threads from users sharing similar and disappointing experiences. We did a test ourselves as part of our upcoming OLED review, and we can confirm that the background noise of our Deck OLED's headphone jack is perceptible while using a pair of IEMs with a 20.5 ohm impedance rating. We also tested this on 2 different sets of over-ear headphones rated at 250 ohms and 300 ohms. The breakover point of what impedance rating results in the noise being audible likely depends on both luck with the unit itself and the hearing of the listener, and of course the actual audio output device. It's quiet, but it's definitely there in the wrong condition, and it would be annoying to some people. A community fix emerged online. It involves electrically isolating the small audio daughter board inside the Deck OLED from its internal ground on the metal frame with some Kapton tape between the screw and the board. The theory is that the noise is a result of a ground loop within the system that becomes audible on very sensitive headphones. IEMs have been gaining popularity in recent years, and a lot of those fit that description. The small audio board is obviously supposed to be grounded, and we haven't tried this particular fix, so we can't speak to any potential downsides to the solution. Valve shared this statement with GN. It says, quote, "We are aware of an issue with some Steam Deck OLED units that'll cause noise when customers connect certain headphones via the 3.5mm headphone jack. The team has identified a fix for impacted units. Customers who have this problem should contact Steam support, who will help arrange for their units to be sent in for repair." Good that Valve has a fix. We don't have the exact details yet, and it's unfortunate that it's happened at all. There are a lot of things that are cool about the Deck OLED. We talked about those in our teardown. Our full review is still on the way. We've been adding more and more tests to it, so hence the delays on it, and we ran into this issue that we wanted to report on. So you've got kind of a preview of that aspect of the review, but that's coming out in the next few weeks, so you'll want to check back on the channel for that. And as for if you have this issue, contact Valve and they should get it sorted for you. We'd be curious to hear from any of you who go through that process. If when you get it back, you can visibly see what they've done to repair it, we'd love to know what that is specifically if we don't go try and figure it out ourselves. Up next, the ROG Ally and the mods for it are getting kind of crazy. One of the latest ones was doubling the battery life by using basically a laptop battery and folding it and smashing it into the unit. Is it safe? No, but it's kind of interesting. YouTube creator CPPC Tech has been experimenting with adding more cooling and storage to the Ally across several videos, and in a recent video showed off an RGB 92mm fan mod with internal power and control. The modder also added a custom white acrylic ROG logo fan grille for style, out ROG and even ROG. CPPC Tech goes over the wiring and shows other mods, like an EK M.2 heatsink on an aftermarket 2280 sized SSD, an additional heatsink on the center of the main heat pipe, and copper shims to soak heat on the RAM. The end result is obviously a little bulky with the fan on the back, but it looks like a well-executed mod overall. That brings us to the next more in-depth mod, which is SlickBuys Mods and Repairs, recently putting up a video on its own YouTube channel showing how it's possible to swap the RAM chips on the Ally's motherboard with higher density ones. This resulted in a total of 32 gigabytes of capacity, and this is similar to previous RAM upgrades we've seen in both the Deck and even the GPU VRAM, where higher density packages are available with identical BGA pin layout and function. Now, unfortunately, the Ally doesn't natively support this. That's because the BIOS doesn't recognize the change. So, SlickBuys in their video show the process of desoldering the actual BIOS chip, attaching a separate hardware programming board to it, reprogramming the BIOS, and then sticking it back on the Ally to accept that change. Some pretty cool stuff happening. Even if you don't want to do this mod, it's just cool to watch it. I think there's a bird of some sort behind me, and frankly, kind of rude. Literally flying through my shot right now. Maybe it landed. I'm being told it landed. Everything's okay. Now, that modification requires changing the hex code as well before putting it back on, but once it's all done, the Ally is upgraded with all the memory detected in Windows Task Manager. Unfortunately, the BIOS modification means that the user can't update BIOS normally in the future without erasing those changes. But lastly, we get the most dangerous mod of them all, which is expanding the battery capacity. The website Ally Mods catalogs several mod guides, including the RAM mod, and one for upgrading to a 90 watt-hour battery, which is normally meant for a laptop. That's over twice the capacity of the stock 40 watt-hour battery. If you are going to do a mod like this, a couple of things. First of all, we don't recommend it. Secondly, it can be dangerous. And third, the guide that they published for this mod recommends that you keep a bucket of sand nearby in case things go south and you need to bring the device outside. So, proceed with caution if you do it. Moving on to the actual mod, it involves getting a battery designed for an ROG G15 laptop, removing the outer covering, separating the two cells on one side, and then actually folding them over on the connection tabs to lay over on top of the cells on the other side. The end result is a reconfiguration of the battery pack that can physically fit into the modified Ally back shell. And again, it's a little dangerous, even if you know what you're doing. There are a couple of options for the shell, including 3D printing a full replacement, cutting a large hole, or attaching a 3D printed shell extension. All of these mods, and the many that we haven't covered, highlight the spirit of modifying things, and this is particularly cool for handheld devices. One of the reasons we're really interested in covering handheld devices is there's a lot of room to do cool stuff. It's very enthusiast-centric, and even if it doesn't always necessarily seem like the most realistic thing, like modding the memory, even just through watching other people do this stuff, it's very educational. So kind of fun to cover it. Up next, AMD has a driver update that fixes the idle power consumption. Again. I think it's only 2 recursive agains. I don't think there's a third one yet, but they'll get there. AMD released its latest 23.12.1 GPU drivers with a few new fixes, features, and tweaks under the hood. For new features, there's a new HyperRX Eco Mode, which is a one-click option to enable multiple power-saving features at once. It's almost like an inverse to the regular HyperRX, which is intended to reduce latency and keep the clocks high. As for fixes, the first is to address the idle power draw of its RX 7000 series GPUs based on the RDNA 3 architecture. Tom's Hardware has a report on this, including some interesting testing. AMD previously pushed an update for the same problem back in July, but it wasn't totally rectified. Tom's testing shows that high idle power draw was still present for the RX 7800 XT and 7700 XT on the previous 23.11.1 drivers, albeit better than at the card's launch. But it's now addressed with the current update. The RX 7600 saw some benefit as well, and the Tom's Hardware testing has some additional details around the impact of monitor refresh rate, but we'll leave that to their article so you can go check that out for the full details. Following that up, AMD has also added support, finally, for hardware accelerated GPU scheduling, which is a feature that was added to Windows in something like July of 2020. And so far, they've confirmed that it's getting added, the support that is, for the RX 7000 series. No word yet on the RX 6000 series or older GPUs and when they might be able to enable that feature as well. Up next, Alphacool has a new Apex RAM cooler. So this one is pretty quick. Alphacool's got a model of active RAM cooler for custom water loops called the Apex RAM X4. It's a water block that mounts on top of the RAM, attached by screws that thread into Alphacool's aftermarket RAM heat spreaders with thermal pads in between them to facilitate thermal transfer. Pricing is at €65 for the block and $30 for each pair of DDR5 heat spreaders, so it's not a cheap solution. Now, for the Americans in our audience, euros is, I think it's like metric for dollars or something, not really sure. Pretty sure it's part of the metric system. This approach is by no means new, but active cooling for RAM really fell out of favor after the DDR2 era. DDR3 and 4 didn't really get that hot, even under reasonable overclocks. You could make it hot, but it wasn't too common for normal use. DDR5, however, starts needing active cooling once you start really pushing it hard. Otherwise, it becomes unstable. The cooling can be just as simple as a fan pointed directly at the sticks. It could be a blow-through, or it could be a water block line like this if you feel like going overkill about it. Even still, it's less ridiculous than older solutions that required running tubing to every single stick. Actually, we've seen even more extreme than that. Alphacool in the past sent us a box of random crap from their warehouse, and one of the things they sent was individual memory, basically IC coolers, so heat sinks that had an inlet and outlet on it, so you could run tubes to the individual modules. So it's not quite there. Up next, the RTX 5880, not to be confused with the maybe will exist one day 5080. The 5880 is a workstation GPU, and this was detailed in one of NVIDIA's recent driver release notes. The 5880 has driver release notes in revision 535 on the NVIDIA official website. They simply state, quote, added support for the RTX 5880 Ada generation GPU. Now, this might be somewhat related to the previous story where NVIDIA is starting to do cut down models of its high-end silicon so that it can make sure it's still able to continue shipping things into restricted markets. This maybe goes alongside the 4090 Dragon or 4090D that we've talked about previously as well, which is supposed to be a cut down or lower power target 4090 that'll ship to the China market and shouldn't fall under the same constraints as the sort of true 4090. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more and go check out that Intel video if you haven't seen it. Or if you have, at least check out the beginning part again. It's kind of wild, but it was fun. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.